Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, The Outsider's View from October 5th. If you want to keep up with everything that's going on in the world, but you don't want to drag down your entire life by listening to the news every day, then get the main stories right here once a week and spend the rest of your time actually living your best life. Let's get right into it. This week got off to a rough start for many people. Early last Sunday, Russia launched nearly 600 drones and close to 50 missiles at Kyiv and other parts of Ukraine, killing at least 4 people and injuring dozens more in an attack that lasted more than 12 hours. Their neighbors over in Poland scrambled jets and closed the airspace over 2 of their southeastern cities until the danger had passed. Meanwhile, Ukraine shot down 568 of the drones and 43 of the missiles that had been launched against them. However, President Zelensky said that the attack succeeded in damaging a cardiology clinic, along with several factories and residential buildings. Zelensky also once again urged the international community to act decisively by cutting off Russia's energy revenues and thus the funding that they need to continue pursuing their invasion of neighboring countries. But so far, Ukraine has failed to convince President Trump to impose punitive sanctions on Moscow. Zelensky argued on the Telegram app that the time for decisive action is long overdue, and we count on a strong response from the United States, Europe, the G7, and the G20. Now, one small nation that has been stepping up for Ukraine, despite having their own problems, is Israel. And they are doing this despite the simple fact that often there has been a lack of reciprocity on that front. But on Saturday, Zelensky said that an additional Patriot missile system from Israel had been deployed and that he expected 2 more to arrive this autumn. Also on Sunday, Denmark had to order a ban on civilian drone flights after drones were observed at several of their military facilities following a week in which drone sorties had caused temporary closures at several Danish airports. In a statement, the Danish military said that it had deployed several capacities in response to the overnight sightings at their bases, while declining to make further comments on the exact nature of their response. In a statement on Sunday, the defense minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, said, "We are currently in a difficult security situation, and we must ensure the best possible working conditions for the armed forces and the police when they are responsible for security during the EU summit." A German air defense frigate also arrived in Copenhagen on Sunday to assist with airspace surveillance during that high-profile event. Sunday was a day of attacks here in the United States as well. Tragedy rocked a small town in Michigan after a man targeted a Morman church with a mass shooting, opening fire on the congregation and dousing the building with an accelerant before setting it on fire. The horrific attack on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints occurred in Grand Blanc, and it left their church completely engulfed in flames. Grand Blanc is a small community of only about 8,000 people, sitting about 50 miles outside of Detroit. The shooting occurred around 10:30 in the morning, right in the middle of their church service, when hundreds of people were peacefully worshiping together. According to Grand Blanc Township's police chief William Rennie, the shooter rammed his vehicle through the front doors of the church before opening fire on the congregation with a semi-automatic rifle, shooting at least 10 people and killing at least 4 of them. He also set fire to the church, and the blaze quickly enveloped most of the building. Officials stated at the time that they feared that the casualty count would rise due to the fire. The suspect that was responsible for all of this violence was later killed in a firefight with the police. Police identified the shooter as a 40-year-old man from nearby Burton, Michigan, just a few miles away from the church. According to the New York Post, he was a veteran of the Marine Corps who served our country in Iraq from 2004 to 2008. Authorities said that they had implemented search warrants for the gunman's home and were going through his cell phone records to find out more about his motives. This attack came only 1 month after the deadly shooting that targeted the Annocation Catholic School in nearby Minnesota, and a little more than 2 weeks after another gunman took the life of the prominent Christian activist Charlie Kirk. President Trump issued a statement saying that this appears to be yet another targeted attack on Christians in the United States of America. He asked that Americans pray for the victims and their families and added, quote, "This epidemic of violence in our country must end immediately." The Attorney General Pam Bondi and the FBI Director Kash Patel, along with the Deputy Director Dan Bongino, also responded quickly, confirming that federal agents were on the scene to assist the local authorities. Patel added that violence in a place of worship is a cowardly and criminal act, while Pam Bondi agreed that such violence at a place of worship is heartbreaking and chilling. Please join me in praying for the victims of this terrible tragedy. Michigan's Governor, Gretchen Whitmer, responded to the news on X as well, posting, "My heart is breaking for the Grand Blanc community. Violence anywhere, especially in a place of worship, is unacceptable. I am grateful to the first responders who took action quickly. We will continue to monitor this situation and hold the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc close." Well, at least she didn't publicly mock the sacrament of Holy Communion this time, so I guess we should be grateful for any baby steps in a positive direction. Speaking of taking action to put a stop to out-of-control situations, this week President Trump continued to crack down on crime in hot spots across the nation by announcing the deployment of troops to Portland, Oregon, where they were ordered to protect the ICE facilities that have been under siege in a city that has been ravaged by crime and violent political riots for the last 5 years. On Saturday, the president posted his announcement that, at the request of Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, I am directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland. I am authorizing full force if necessary. Portland has long been the epicenter of terrorist activity for Antifa, the far-left political movement that has been linked to riots and violent demonstrations for years at this point, including violent protests that have involved killing innocent elderly people. According to the Department of Homeland Security, militants have also repeatedly laid siege to ICE facilities in that city, attacking agents with rocks, fireworks, and smoke grenades, blocking entrances, setting fires, and even doxing federal agents by posting their home addresses on message boards and flyers that they have posted around the city. In response to Antifa's violence in Portland and elsewhere in the country, last week, President Trump issued an executive order saying, I hereby designate Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization. And he called the group a militarist, anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, while using a campaign of violence and terrorism nationwide to accomplish these goals. The Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, said earlier this month, the Antifa riots, the attacks on ICE officers, the doxing campaigns, and now the political assassinations, these are not lone, isolated events. This is part of an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. It is structured and sophisticated, well-funded, it is well-planned. It is terrorism on our soil. And recent studies conducted by left-leaning groups show that for the first time in decades, radical left violence outnumbers far-right violence by 5-1. In far-left Portland, the thought of law and order actually being restored prompted flyers to be posted around the city, calling on members to squad up, make travel plans, bring PPE, and your unhinged Portland energy. Sounds about accurate. These misguided, angry people are following the example that their leaders keep setting. Democrat lawmakers in the city have only doubled down on their opposition to Trump's crackdown on their city's unsafe anarchy. The city's official website has a permanent banner at the top that reads, "Portland is a sanctuary city." The website also links to an anti-ICE hotline and reassures Portland residents that local law enforcement will not cooperate with federal immigration agents. Over the weekend, Democrat lawmakers from across the city decried Trump's efforts to end the lawlessness that they have indulged for far too long as being authoritarianism, while claiming that they had things under control. All evidence to the contrary. On Saturday, Oregon's Democrat governor, Tina Kotek, said, "Portland and the state of Oregon believe in the rule of law, and we can manage our own local public safety needs. There is no insurrection. There is no threat to national security, and there is no need for military troops in our major city. They are not needed here." On Sunday, Oregon and Portland filed a joint lawsuit against the Trump administration in an effort to block the deployment of their state's National Guard to those cities. Their suit claimed, in part, far from promoting public safety, defendants' provocative and arbitrary actions threaten to undermine public safety by inciting a public outcry. I can't help but notice that when conservatives are incited into making a public outcry, there is absolutely no inherent threat to public safety that comes along with that. For example, there were no riots over Charlie Kirk's assassination, and none were even expected, which is telling. Not for a moment. Not by anyone. Not a single store anywhere in this country was even concerned that it might happen. None of them boarded up their windows in the belief that danger was even a possibility. And yet, it is just supposed to be accepted as a fact that when the left gets upset, there will be unsafe violence, as though that is an unavoidable given. So why is that given acceptable to anyone in our society? Why should we accept being put in danger whenever grown adults want to pitch a violent temper tantrum every time that they get upset? Why don't we actually expect them to behave like adults and grow up? Why do we tolerate it when they don't? And when is that going to change? Something to think about. Anyway, the deployment of troops came in response to riots in Portland around the ICE facility, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem requested that Trump deploy troops to the area to stop the clashes. So now Trump is doing exactly that in both Portland and in Broadview, Illinois. All I can say is, if you want him to leave, stop attacking agents. It is that simple. Protest all you like, but no attacking. Or the troops stay. Although the situation is lesser known, in Broadview, ICE has made several arrests, including arresting armed rioters. One of them was reportedly carrying what looked like an explosive device, and law enforcement is still investigating that. There were other incidents as well. The superintendent of Des Moines Public Schools was arrested by ICE last week on multiple charges, including immigration violations. He has a track record of problems in the United States ever since he arrived in 1999 under a student visa, which he has long since overstayed. Dr. Ian Roberts has a standing deportation order from an immigration judge that was issued last year, in addition to a 2020 arrest on a firearms charge. And yet, he was somehow serving as the superintendent of a school full of children despite this. When ICE attempted to pull Roberts over, he drove away. ICE said that he tried to escape, but agents later found his car abandoned in nearby woods, and they found Roberts a short distance away. Roberts had $3,000 in cash on him at the time. He also had a switchblade for hunting and a loaded firearm. And for the record, illegal immigrants are legally barred from possessing firearms in this country. So add that crime to a rapidly growing list by this man who clearly does not respect our right to make the rules in our country, which indicates he does not want to become a part. The ATF has launched an investigation into how he was able to obtain those firearms, given his illegal status. And that is in addition to the pressing questions of how he became the superintendent in Des Moines, given his illegal status in the United States. On Friday, the Department of Homeland Security revealed that this illegal immigrant, to whom countless children were entrusted, has a lengthy rap sheet going back nearly 2 decades. According to DHS, on July 3rd, 1996, Roberts was charged in New York with criminal possession of narcotics with the intent to sell them, criminal possession of narcotics, criminal possession of a forgery device, and possession of a forged instrument. So, he's an illegal drug dealer who was running our schools. 2 years later, Roberts faced a charge for third-degree unauthorized use of a vehicle in Queens, which was later dismissed, so he's a car thief as well. Roberts was then convicted for reckless driving, unsafe operation, and speeding in Maryland on November 1st, 2012, so he has a record of being a danger to the innocent public around him. He then faced charges in 2020 for second-degree criminal possession of a weapon, having a loaded firearm in public, third-degree criminal possession of a weapon, in his case, an ammunition feeding device, and fourth-degree weapon charges, none of which he is legally allowed to have. But I am sure the lawless drug dealer had a perfectly above-board reason for walking around with a gun. But we're not done. Roberts was also convicted in 2022 for unlawful possession of a loaded firearm in Pennsylvania. According to DHS, the now ex-superintendent tried to apply for a green card 4 different times and was denied on each and every attempt. But for some reason, he was not deported as he should have been. His employment authorization, which he should never have had as an illegal alien, expired on December 18th, 2020, roughly 3 years before he was hired for his latest role as a school superintendent in Des Moines, according to the DHS. He also failed to appear at his latest hearing, where an immigration judge did order his removal from the United States, and yet he is still here, for no good reason. According to the school district, he did undergo background checks that were conducted by a third party. A third party also reportedly recruited him for that position, and those third parties now need to be held accountable for that. According to the school district in question, Des Moines Public Schools hired the firm JG Consulting to recruit possible superintendent candidates in December of 2022. The firm used the company Baker Eubanks to conduct a background check into Roberts, which the district said found nothing relating to citizenship or immigration matters related to him. However, a spokesman for Baker Eubanks recently told the Daily Wire that all publicly available criminal records were shared with the school district and that they ultimately chose to proceed with the hire despite having received the information regarding his concerning history. The school district is now suing JG Consulting based on claims that it failed to properly vet Roberts. So let the blame games begin. I personally vote for both of you to be held accountable for the unacceptable situation that you both played a part in creating. Sound fair? According to Roberts' LinkedIn profile, Roberts previously held school leadership positions in several other municipalities as well, including Washington, D.C. and Maryland. So there needs to be investigation in those blue districts too. This country is not a free-for-all. But some immature people think that power is meant to be used as their own personal toy. This week, Morning Wire reported that the FBI has admitted that they did place hundreds of plainclothes agents in the crowd that gathered around the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. For several years, that agency has refused to acknowledge those 274 agents until now. And that refusal to be transparent and honest with the people that they serve has raised many questions about the Bureau's past leadership. President Trump responded to the new admission by lumping in former FBI Director Christopher Wray with another former FBI Director, James Comey, who is now under indictment, saying that they were both trusted officials who got caught lying. The president later told NBC News that he would certainly imagine that Wray is being investigated by the Justice Department. Meanwhile, the new FBI Director, Kash Patel, clarified that the plainclothes agents that day were sent in against FBI standards after the riot had started to provide crowd control, and that the issue at stake was the failure of a corrupt leadership that lied to Congress and to the American people about what really happened. And for that exposed dishonesty, former Director Wray is now in the hot seat, where he is facing numerous questions, even from rank-and-file FBI agents who were present at the Capitol on January 6th. Last week, an after-action report that was revealed to Congress listed an entire host of issues that FBI agents have had with the recent leadership of the FBI. Several agents have expressed their own concerns that politics had deeply influenced the Bureau's mission over the course of both Comey's and Wray's tenures as directors. Arizona's Republican Congressman Andy Briggs said that Wray will be held accountable, and he pointed to an exchange that he had with Wray in 2023 as potential grounds to issue another indictment. The transcript of that exchange reads, "Briggs, I thought I heard you say you didn't know whether there were FBI agents or informants or human sources in the Capitol or in the vicinity on January 6th. Did I misunderstand you? I thought that's what you said." Wray, I referred very specifically to undercover agents. Briggs, and so are you acknowledging then there were undercover agents? Wray, as I sit here right now, I do not believe there were undercover agents on the scene. Now, word games aside, obviously, this isn't a matter of belief. As the director, he would know for a fact one way or the other. And we do have the right to expect and to demand honesty from our leaders. So if all of this does come to another indictment, it is already being argued that plainclothes is synonymous with undercover, obviously. On the other hand, Wray made it clear that he believed his statement to be true, but he deliberately stopped short of explicitly stating that they were true. This ambiguity underscores that regardless of the frustration that many people feel over the FBI's unacceptable behavior, perjury cases are challenging charges to win convictions on unless you can prove that he did in fact know what was going on with his agents in his agency. But you have to be able to prove it. But unfortunately, truth is not the only virtue that is now on the endangered species list. Free speech also continues to be under heavy assault in Europe, especially in the formerly proud UK. Over the weekend, in a move that the U.S. State Department called tyrannical, a 75-year-old grandmother, Rose Dougherty, once again found herself being put into handcuffs in Scotland, not for committing a crime of violence, but simply for holding an anti-abortion sign. Now, whether you agree with them or not, this grandmother's perfectly reasonable opinions are actually criminal in the same land that was once the birthplace of many of our most cherished liberties. But now, the country that William Wallace died for proudly polices wrongthink in their elderly citizens like an Orwellian nightmare. And to prove to you just how truly egregious this case is, Granny Rose's abhorrent sign read in full, and I quote, "Coercion is a crime. Here to talk. Only if you want." End quote. Yes, that was the sign that required an arrest. There were no confrontations that took place, and not even the direct mention of abortion, just a placard offering a mutually consensual conversation to anyone who wanted it. And for that, for offering to listen and to have an open conversation that wasn't controlled by the world's busybodies, and where Granny might say something that wasn't pre-approved by her government, Mrs. Dougherty was arrested outside of Glasgow's Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, allegedly for violating Scotland's sweeping buffer zone law, which criminalizes not only harassment or intimidation around abortion clinics, but it also criminalizes the deliberately vague notion of influencing people in the vicinity. That's right, only the government has the monopoly on influencing people's thoughts. Stay in your lane, Granny. Have you no respect? Those thoughts are the property of the inclusive people. So stay away. To be specific, this travesty of a so-called law forbids anything that the people in power randomly decide qualifies as influencing within 200 meters of every hospital in the entire country of Scotland. And this is all played out before. This isn't Mrs. Dougherty's first run-in with the law. She was recently arrested in August for holding the same sign in the same spot. That case was quietly dropped after global outrage sparked over this tyranny, along with a direct rebuke from the State Department was issued. To compound the outrage, Mrs. Dougherty has had 2 hip replacements, and after her most recent arrest, she was reportedly denied a chair for several hours while she was in custody. Her bail conditions now prevent her from returning not only to the legal buffer zone, but also to an even larger arbitrary restricted zone that was created just for her. So much for equality before the law. Mrs. Dougherty's legal team at Alliance Defending Freedom International calls that expansion disproportionate. Her legal counsel, Lorcan Price, hit the nail on the head, saying, "This is not a case about harassment or intimidation. This is simply a grandmother who held a sign offering to speak to anyone who would like to engage." In response to this new arrest, The State Department issued a statement to the Telegraph saying the arrest of Rose Dougherty is another egregious example of the tyrannical suppression of free speech happening across Europe, when 75-year-old grandmothers are being arrested for standing peacefully and offering conversation. Common sense and basic civility are under attack. The United States will always speak out against these violations of fundamental rights. But Scotland's government, led by oppressors who are as determined to muzzle any dissent as good old Longshanks ever was, seem committed to pushing their ludicrous narrative that a peaceful granny who is offering to talk to only the people who choose of their own free will to take her up on that generous offer is somehow a public threat. And the government needs to be the one who gets to decide who can talk to each other and who can't. In a moment that will live in infamy, a Scottish member of Parliament, Gillian Mackay, the architect of this abhorrent law, publicly admitted that someone could potentially be criminalized for praying inside of their own home if they were visible from the street, depending on who was passing by the window at the time. That is the level of abuse that she designed this law for. I really miss the Scotland that didn't tolerate overreaching dictators. You know, the Scotland that Rome itself gave up on controlling and built a wall instead. The Scotland that many of my ancestors came from, a fact which was once a source of pride for me. But Dougherty herself made a much better case than her oppressors when she summed everything up by saying conversation is not forbidden on the streets of Glasgow, and yet this is the second time I have been arrested for doing just that. Scotland, meet your mirror. Her name is Rose. And all that is missing from this story is for her to shout, "You'll never take my freedom!" But we had our own drama this week back on this side of the pond. On Monday, the White House was buzzing as President Trump sought crucial deals both at home and abroad. The president hosted Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and also several congressional leaders. The president spent the day simultaneously pushing to end the war in Gaza and to avoid a government shutdown. As of Tuesday, the 2026 budget had not been passed by Congress, and if leaders could not reach an agreement within 24 hours, a shutdown would commence at midnight, with large swaths of the federal government closing their doors and only essential services remaining open. Republicans proposed a temporary stopgap measure in order to keep the lights on while lawmakers finalized the long-term budget. The House passed that measure, 217 to 212 earlier this month, but that measure then stalled out in the Senate over the ludicrous demands that Democrats were using to hold the country hostage. While Republicans do have a slim Senate majority, the Senate filibuster requires them to win over at least 7 Democrat votes, and the Democrats were not budging. Republicans wanted to pass a clean resolution that would keep funding at the exact same level across the board while shelving policy debates for later on. Their measure would maintain the exorbitant, record-breaking federal spending levels that were set under President Biden while offering some additional funding for the personal security of lawmakers, judges, and other federal officials, given the rising violence in this country. From one side of the aisle at least. But Democrats declared that they would only pass that stopgap measure, that temporary stopgap measure, if it added billions of dollars of new funding for Obamacare subsidies and Medicaid as a way of bypassing the big, beautiful bill that was lawfully passed. They also want the deal to include measures that would prevent the White House from blocking congressionally appropriated funds, and they want to indirectly guarantee free health care for illegal aliens, which is forbidden by law, through an evasive sleight of hand. So why are Democrats making these insane demands? When Democrats ultimately failed to stop Trump's big, beautiful bill this summer, which I myself had problems with, the party's far-left base was furious, and it hasn't let them live it down. So the entire party is facing pressure to push back. Democrats knew that Republicans were unlikely to give in to their demands, so they were playing chicken and daring conservatives to allow the shutdown in the false belief that Republicans would be blamed for the shutdown that they clearly forced. That assumption proved to be a big risk that Democrats had significantly miscalculated. The New York Times and Siena College released a poll that suggests that the vast majority of American voters would actually prefer to see Democrats in Congress get to work and find a way to avoid this pointless and costly show. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt posted a screenshot of a single poll question in the Times that asked 1,075 voters which of the following statements came closest to an accurate representation of their opinion on the looming shutdown. The first choice read, "The Democrats should shut down the government if their demands are not met." And just over one-fourth, 27% of respondents selected that answer. The second choice, which was chosen by 65% of respondents, 2/3 of Americans, read, "The Democrats should not shut down the government even if their demands are not met." Less than 1/10, just 7% of respondents did not choose either of the two options. So, even the left-wing Times poll says that 2/3 of Americans are not on the side of Democrat lawmakers on this one. We actually don't like all of the performative virtue signaling nonsense that we have to pay for. Only 1/4 of the nation does. Can you do basic math? Everyone else wants you to do your damn job and leave us alone. A small fraction wants you to put on a performative show so that they feel like you're resisting. But House Democrats haven't heard the people for a long time from deep inside of their echo chambers where they only ever hear one fringe perspective. So they went all in on the imminent shutdown and even shared a group photo celebrating their refusal to come to the table. Their out-of-touch caption claimed, "House Democrats in D.C. are ready to cancel the cuts, lower the costs, save health care." You know what? I'm just going to pass. Engaging in a battle of wits against people who are this unarmed almost takes the enjoyment out of watching them crash and burn. Almost. Senate Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota agreed, saying, "This is a made-up problem by Democrats who desperately need to satisfy a political base that is hostile to Donald Trump. That's what this is all about. This doesn't have anything to do with health care." You know, if only Democrats could do basic math, they would realize that 2/3 is more than 1/4, and pleasing that tiny fringe group is exactly the thing that is costing them the rest of the pie. But I honestly hope that they never wake up to that reality. Meanwhile, we will be holding them accountable for everything that follows when it comes time for the next elections, as is our right in a democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people. According to Lemeyu, if the shutdown continues, the troops who are protecting America will go without pay. Federal funding for the law enforcement operations that are successfully cracking down on the epidemic of crime that has turned many of us into victims could stop. Our veterans will lose many of their assistance programs while their centers are closed. Air traffic controllers and TSA agents will have to work without pay, which could impact travel. And certain healthcare programs will expire or face delays, including the SNAP nutritional programs. Great look, Democrats. This was definitely the hill that you should have chosen to die on. The hill where chickening out just became your best option. And speaking of the best options you are going to get, as I mentioned, Trump also hosted the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House on Monday. The two leaders met privately before holding a joint press conference in which Trump formally released a 20-point plan to end the war in Gaza. That ceasefire plan offered some concessions. For example, it offered Palestinians the right to remain in Gaza after the war, amnesty for the Hamas members who turn in their weapons, and a vague acknowledgement of the potential for an eventual creation of a Palestinian state at some point in the future after certain conditions are met, which is very unlikely if you know the history here, but the offer at least demonstrates a willingness to compromise. The 20-point plan also includes many things that Israelis appreciate. For example, it requires Hamas to not have any role in the governance of Gaza in any form. It calls for all military and terror infrastructure to be destroyed and never rebuilt, and it demands all remaining hostages be released within 72 hours. Prime Minister Netanyahu supported the proposal, saying it achieves our war aims. He added that if Hamas accepted, Israel would withdraw its troops from Gaza and place them in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu also said, if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. Hamas has already rejected several of the points that are included in this latest plan, but Trump said that because so many of the terror group's leaders have been killed, they're dealing with new people now. He also said that if they reject this final offer, the United States would support Israel in completely eliminating the terror group. So, like it or not, this is the best offer that they are going to get. That offer insists that Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza, who have suffered more than enough. The plan starts with a ceasefire if both Hamas and Israel agree to the framework. Once both sides agree, aid will begin to flow into the Strip, including rebuilding hospitals, bakeries, roads, and other key pieces of infrastructure. The Israeli military will cease its advance through Gaza City and withdraw to a predetermined line, while Hamas must return all of the hostages, including both the living and the dead, to Israel within 72 hours. In return, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners, plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7th, including all women and children detained in that context, meaning women and minors who were used to make attacks, as is common in the Middle East. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. That proposed hostage exchange, while massively biased in favor of Hamas and Gaza, is consistent with past prisoner swaps that have also grossly skewed in their favor because Israel actually values their people. Members of Hamas who agree to disarm and commit to peaceful coexistence will be given amnesty and may continue to live in Gaza, or they will be given safe passage elsewhere. My vote is for hell. Under the ceasefire agreement, Gaza will be administered by qualified Palestinians and international experts under the oversight of a board of peace, an international body that will be chaired by the President of the United States. Also, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We will encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. No terror group may be involved in administering Gaza. All of Hamas's terror infrastructure, including its vast web of tunnels and weapons facilities, will be completely destroyed, along with the military sites of all other terrorist groups that are operating within the Gaza Strip. In return, Israel will agree to neither occupy nor annex Gaza, because this new Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. To that end, an interfaith dialogue process will be established based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence to try and change mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. Talk about an uphill battle among a people whose preschooler cartoons teach them to murder Jews as they sing children's songs celebrating the spray of blood from suicide bombers. You can go watch the clips online. They're illuminating. But the plan continues. The United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. Trump said at the press conference, "Today is a historic day for peace, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have just concluded an important meeting on many vital issues, including Iran, trade, expansion of the Abraham Accords, and most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza. I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan and for trusting that if we work together, we can bring an end to the death and destruction that we've seen for so many years." Trump said that a number of Arab nations have also agreed to this outline, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, Indonesia, Pakistan, I said Turkey already, excuse me, leaving Hamas completely isolated. The joint statement of these Arab states was signed by the foreign minister of each country. The Arab states said in their joint statement that they welcome President Donald J. Trump's leadership and his sincere efforts to end the war in Gaza, and assert their confidence in his ability to find a path to peace. The ministers affirm their readiness to engage positively and constructively with the United States and the parties towards finalizing the agreement and ensuring its implementation in a manner that ensures peace, security, and stability for the peoples, plural, of the region. Trump added, under the plan, Arab and Muslim countries have committed to demilitarize Gaza, and that's quickly, decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terror organizations, do that immediately, and we're relying on the countries that I named and others to deal with Hamas. Hamas is now the only party that has yet to accept the deal, according to the president. If Hamas rejects the proposal, as is likely, Israel would receive the full backing of the United States to, quote, do what you have to do. But this deal is clearly going into effect with or without Hamas agreeing to it. Netanyahu said, I believe that today we are taking a critical step towards both ending the war in Gaza and setting the stage for dramatically advancing peace in the Middle East. However, if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. the Prime Minister promised. Trump has given Hamas a deadline to get on board or face a, quote, very sad end. Hamas immediately told the BBC and other sources that they plan to reject the deal, and I will admit I was hoping you'd say that. And speaking of truly awful people who need to pay for victimizing others, this week Maryland auditors uncovered a major scandal involving the state's social services, who placed foster children with known sex offenders, and then also failed to act on the reports of abuse. One state lawmaker called the findings abhorrent and demanded that the responsible parties be fired immediately. I was thinking more along the lines of jail time. But I'll settle for firings. For now. Harsh consequences are called for in this case, given the very deliberate nature of what went on here. According to a government report, in as many as half of these cases, Maryland Social Services faked the verifications that proved that they had done the required background checks on these potential foster parents. This resulted in 10 children being sent to live with 7 different registered adult sex offenders in so-called foster homes last year. In 2023, a branch of Maryland's Department of Human Services reviewed a group foster home. But that supposed review failed to note that the group home was employing a man who had been convicted of sexual assault of a minor. Prosecutors said that 3 months later, surprise, the man transported 3 of the children in his care to a location where he could abuse them. In another case, the government was paying a convicted murderer $1,300 per child per night to offer one-on-one care, that's a quote, to foster children in hotel rooms. And the department deliberately funded this placement instead of utilizing foster homes that offered much safer and more cost-effective care. To top it all off, this was not the first time that many of these issues had come to light and been brought to the attention of the people in charge, and still, the agency made almost no efforts to change or to protect the vulnerable children in their care. The audit found that after the registered sex offender allegedly abused the kids in his care, the Social Services Administration, quote, could not document any corrective actions as a result of this incident to ensure the criminal background checks were in fact obtained from that point on, at the very least. What were these professionals thinking, you might ask? It seems that basically they didn't want to do the work that they were being paid to do, and they didn't really care if kids got sexually assaulted as a result. They only wanted the data to look good, even if the kids were actually suffering. One of the responsibilities of the Social Services Administration is to ensure that foster children attend school. They are responsible to make sure of that. And that agency publicly claimed that virtually all of the kids in their care were going to school. However, when auditors examined the database, they found no evidence that 38% of these kids were going to school anywhere. Let me say that again. There was no proof at all that 40% of these foster kids were even being sent to school, much less properly cared for in other ways. And what was the result when government employees were confronted? with these facts? Well, the auditors who uncovered all of this stated that the agency made numerous excuses that all appeared to be proven false. There were 17,000 allegations of abuse or neglect of foster kids under their care, and county agencies are legally required to investigate all of them immediately. And if they fail to do that, then the state agency is required by law to report their noncompliance to the legislature. Neither one of those things happened in Maryland. The state made excuses for some of the investigations being delayed by months, citing a, quote, natural disaster as their reason for failing in this duty, even though no one could point to what natural disaster had occurred in that part of Maryland in 2024, because there wasn't one. And now that the shit is hitting the fan, the agency acknowledges that, quote, our regulations for privately certifying foster parents lacked a crimes of violence prohibition required by the Social Security Act, and we are updating this regulation. Well, whoop-de-frickin-do. The agency also said, after the cases where children were living with sex offenders, and those cases had been identified, that we took action. In one case, we contacted law enforcement, who conducted a safety check and confirmed the children were safe. In another case, we contacted the Office of Parole and Probation and found out that while an identified individual was on the registry, there were no restrictions prohibiting their presence around children. For the remaining cases, law enforcement and probation officers determined there was insufficient information to warrant a welfare check. Okay, so in one case, after what you did, we are supposed to take your word for it that the kids are safe with the sex offender. In another case, you confirmed that the kids were around a registered sex offender, but you left them there because there was no rule that said that you had to give a damn. And for everybody else, you didn't even check on the kids. And you want a pat on the head? Not good enough. Not anywhere near good enough. I want these people to go to jail, where they can find out what it feels like to be forgotten by everyone else in this world, while your life becomes a living hell of sexual assaults. And speaking of living hells, starting on Monday, Afghanistan went under a total internet blackout as the Taliban decided to stop immoral activities by cutting off their country's access to the rest of the world. CNN reported that internet and phone services have been cut for the 43 million people living in that Middle Eastern country, and many people living outside of Afghanistan are concerned about having no ability to contact their family members and friends who are still trapped inside. I am so glad that we spent 2 whole decades, money that we needed elsewhere, and worst of all, the lifeblood of our young people, all to make that country into the exact same hellhole that it was before we did anything. Instead of just taking out bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and then coming home. Multiple flights that were scheduled to land in Kabul on Tuesday morning were also canceled, and unsurprisingly, the Taliban's leadership has yet to address the issue at all. NetBlocks, a watchdog group that monitors internet outages around the world, said on Monday that Afghanistan is now in the midst of a total internet blackout as Taliban authorities move to implement morality measures, with multiple networks disconnected through the morning in a stepwise manner. Telephone services are currently also impacted. In an update on Tuesday morning, NetBlocks added, It has now been 24 hours since Afghanistan imposed a national internet blackout, cutting off residents from the rest of the world. The ongoing measure marks the Taliban's return to the conservative values it espoused a quarter of a century ago, limiting basic freedoms. A Taliban official reportedly spoke to the Washington Post on conditions of anonymity, saying that the internet shutdown had been discussed by the terror group for a week prior to that. The official added that the country could not survive without the internet and that everything is at standstill at the moment. This move by the Taliban is the most severe action the regime has taken to cut off the country from the outside world since resuming control in 2021 thanks to Joe Biden. Taliban officials hinted at their planned use of this tactic earlier this month, saying that they wanted to prevent immoral activities, according to CNN. Along with disrupting communications between family members and colleagues, the internet shutdown has obviously threatened to further hide the Taliban's continued human rights abuses. Multiple American citizens who were held hostage by the Taliban were recently released, but at least one Afghan American, Mahmoud Habibi, is still believed to be in the custody of the Taliban as we speak. Since the Taliban took over the country following the United States withdrawal in 2021, the regime has also cracked down on women's rights, banning girls from receiving any secondary and higher education and forcing women out of jobs throughout the country and back into sensory deprivation veils. Maryam Solamekil, who was a member of the previous Afghan government that was overthrown by the Taliban, said, "The silence online without Afghan voices from inside Afghanistan is deafening. My heart hurts. Our people are being cut off, and the world is left in darkness without them." Ms. Solayam Akil called on Elon Musk to provide internet access to her country through his Starlink satellites. Starlink is currently exploring the expansion of its internet access to many countries in the Middle East, including Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan. However, there are no plans to provide services in Afghanistan at this point, according to the company's availability maps. Ms. Solayamankil pointed out Starlink is the only way to break the chains of Taliban censorship. This is the time where you stand on the right side of history. Well, I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you. Because if the virtue-signaling left has to choose between living up to the ideals that they claim to believe in, such as the equality of women and basic human rights for all, versus not doing the empty virtue-signaling show of opposing everything that Elon Musk or Trump do, then my money is that they are going to let those ideals fly right out the window in order to keep up their show of pretend resistance, which is exactly why no one respects them. After all, you can at least respect people that you disagree with, but you can't respect that. No one can. And speaking of people that no one respects, while Jimmy Kimmel couldn't help but gloat about his temporary post-suspension viewership spike, even publicly thanking President Trump for making it all possible, even his critics couldn't foresee how incredibly brief that minor ratings boost would be. Those numbers have already come crashing back down to normal. Despite being given the opportunity of having all of those extra people tuning in to see what he had to say after his heroic ordeal, Kimmel couldn't manage to be entertaining enough to keep any of them coming back for a second week. Kimmel's return last Tuesday drew what was, for his abysmal numbers, a record-breaking 6.3 million viewers, which was sadly more than triple his regular audience. And tragically, just 2 days later, by Thursday, those numbers had dropped by 64%, leveling off at 2.3 million views. According to the New York Post, the worst news for Jimmy was that in the all-important 25 to 54-year-old demographic, Jimmy Kimmel Live dropped from 1.7 million viewers on Tuesday to less than 500,000 by Thursday, in response to Kimmel's slander that caused his suspension and his crocodile tears upon his return. Turning Point USA spokesman Andrew Klobot said, Kimmel is an unrepentant liar who tried to blame Charlie's assassination on the part of the country that just spent the last 2 weeks praying and holding vigils. What he's really saying is that he still thinks it's fair game to slander conservatives. He would rather advance his own political and cultural agenda than confront the truth. It's critical that liars admit they lied. There can be no restoration without that. Anything short of that is a fake and scripted cry line designed to endear him to his fans, not to make right the wrong he committed. I agree. Take real responsibility, like a real man, and I'll give you some real credit, Jimmy. Fair? And speaking of people, one of our own, who deserves some real credit. On Monday, at a House Judiciary field hearing in Charlotte, North Carolina, Steve Federico did more than just testify to his representatives. He erupted at our sorry excuse for leaders. Mr. Federico's voice shook with the emotions of fury and loss as he laid bare the failure of a justice system that was so drunk on toxic empathy that it actually allowed a repeat, violent offender to walk free, thus enabling him to execute Mr. Federico's poor daughter, Logan Federico, in cold blood. Her father began, "My daughter was Logan Federico. She was 22, visiting friends at the University of South Carolina." But what began as a simple description quickly became a thunderous indictment, not just of one killer, Alexander Devontae Dickey, but of the system that set him free to hunt innocent victims despite him having committed 25 felonies and having 39 arrests, for which he had spent a total of just over 600 days in prison, spread out over a 10-year-long crime spree. That is correct. He spent less than 2 years in prison for committing 25 felonies and for having more arrests than the number of years that he's been alive. Mr. Federico painted a harrowing scene for the policymakers who are, after all, responsible for the outcomes of the policies that they create, along with the innocent casualties that are on their hands. Quote, "I know you all have kids. I'm just curious. Here's what I need you to do. When I tell you this story, think about your kids. Think about your child coming home from a night out with their friends, laying down, going to sleep, feeling somebody come into the room and wake them and drag her out of bed naked, forced on her knees, with her hands over her head, begging for her life, begging for her hero, her father, me, that couldn't be there. She was 5'3" and weighed 115 pounds. Bye," he thundered. "Dead. Gone. Why?" The room fell silent, but Mr. Federico kept going, hammering the point home. Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 GD times, 25 felonies, was on the street. How about that? How good are we doing for our family? How good are you doing for your kids? He should have been in jail for over 140 years for all the crimes he committed. You know how much time he spent in prison? A little over 600 days in 10 years. He's only 30 years old. He was committing 2.65 crimes a year since he was 15 years old. But nobody could figure out that he couldn't be rehabilitated. Well, you'd have to put him in prison to see if he could be rehabilitated. Isn't that the idea of prison? But no. This understandably outraged father wasn't just angry at his daughter's career criminal killer. He was furious at the prosecutors, judges, and lawmakers who allow monsters to roam free to make themselves feel noble at the little people's expense. My daughter wanted to be a teacher. She finally figured it out 2 weeks before she was executed. One specific target of this father's righteous anger was Barry Gibson, South Carolina's 5th Judicial Circuit Court solicitor, whom Mr. Federico claimed hadn't reached out to him once in the 4 months since Logan's murder, saying, "And I haven't heard a damn word from Barry Gibson in South Carolina. Not one word." 4 months, no communication. His biggest concern was that he was pissed off at my interview and how I made him look on the Fox News channel with Trey Gowdy. How pathetic is that? That we're letting our 22-year-old kid visiting friends. It's all she ever wanted to do was visit friends. And she literally was executed while on her knees begging for her life. Her name's Logan Federico, not Irina. And you will not forget her, I promise you. You will be sick and tired of my face and my voice until this gets fixed. I will fight until my last breath for my daughter, he courageously vowed. This House hearing was meant to address rising crime and repeat offenders, but Mr. Federico's speech held up a mirror and turned it into a reckoning with evil. You need to fight for the rest of our children, the rest of the innocents, and stop protecting the people that keep taking them from us. Please, you have the power. We put you into power to do what you have to do. We're asking you, we're begging you all to stop this. 39 crimes in 10 years, 25 felonies. Can anybody here explain to me how possibly he could be on the street? Possibly be on the street. How is it possible? I could sit down every night and explain the whole process of how it failed, how South Carolina failed Logan, how lack of communication. Mr. Federico closed by reminding lawmakers how long his daughter's body lay on the floor, 7 hours, before anyone realized she was dead, while her killer was off using her stolen debit card to go on a guilt-free shopping spree. What y'all did? You woke up a beast, and you pissed off the wrong daddy. Because I'm going to put it out there, and I'm not going to be quiet until somebody helps. Logan deserves to be heard. Everyone on this panel deserves to be heard, and we will. Trust me. My daughter laid on that floor for 7 hours before somebody in that house recognized that something was wrong. And that pure criminal, an hour later, he went on a spending spree with her debit card. When they saw his face on a video, they didn't have to do a check. He was arrested so many times, they knew who he was. They knew exactly where to go to get him. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic that I am here today. Thank you for your time. While Democrats responded to these demands for justice by calling for more resources for prosecutors, Republicans pointed to a systemic failure of accountability, Representative Dan Bishop declared, "This is not a money issue. This is a policy issue." And while we all know that he is absolutely correct about that, this speech was about much more than the obvious. Mr. Federico, a grieving father now forced to turn activist, declared war on a justice system that virtue signaled by letting his daughter's killer roam free. Politicians may have failed to have grasped the impact of the moment, that one of our own declared, "You woke up a beast, you pissed off the wrong daddy," but America heard him. And it would be very stupid of you to underestimate the resolve that you have finally awoken and cemented into our spines through way too many egregious assaults and abuses. You are playing with fire. This is going to stop because we, as the people, say so. And in a democracy, the people rule, and their elected officials represent them, not themselves. You have been warned. You would be wise to recognize the shifting tides before they sweep you away. And speaking of very popular changes, over in Quantico this week, both Trump and Hegseth each delivered speeches to just about every top commander in the United States military. The Secretary of War repeated the clear priorities that he has often pushed since becoming the head of the military: cutting social engineering distractions from military life and restoring the warrior ethos, saying, "No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses, no more climate change worship, no more division, distraction, or gender delusions, no more debris." As I've said before and will say again, we are done with that shit. To build the military back into what it has always been, and what it should be again, Hegseth offered a test that each military leader could use to evaluate the recent change in direction to those conditions. Would you allow your own child to serve in the military as it is currently structured? Unless the answer is an unqualified yes, then there are more changes that need to be made. He said, "This means at the War Department, first and foremost, we must restore a ruthless, dispassionate, and common sense application of standards. I don't want my sons serving alongside troops who are out of shape, or in combat units with females who can't meet the same combat arms physical standards as men." The president's speech was different in its tone. It was more like a military-focused campaign speech. He pointed out that under his administration, the military has crushed their recruitment goals, and how the United States is leading China and Russia in military advances, saying, "My message to you is very simple. I am with you. I support you, and as president, I have your back 100%. You'll never see me waver even a little bit. That's the way it is." Good enough for me. We should all have the backs of the people who lay down their lives so that we can live ours. And I will not ask them to be activists on top of that, or to increase their own odds of coming home in a flag-draped box, all so that someone else who can't meet those same harsh demands can feel good about themselves and get the job that they want regardless of their ability to do it, leaving others to pick up the slack and to be less protected out there. The military is life and death. So everybody gets to serve in the capacity that they are proven to be fully capable of serving in. End of debate. And speaking of ending debates, on Wednesday, the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, announced that he is planning to investigate reports that Texas Christian University canceled a Turning Point USA event. The event was initially scheduled to be held on the TCU campus as part of the tour that Charlie Kirk began before his assassination on September 10th. Now it was set to feature the well-known detransitioner turned activist Chloe Cole. But Chloe announced that her event had been canceled just 1 week before it was supposed to take place. Chloe posted a short thank you to Hillsdale College, where she had spoken recently, thanking them for being the first college to actually thank me for speaking on their campus instead of canceling me like TCU just did. Christian colleges and otherwise need to step up to keep democracy and free speech alive in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. She followed that post up with an updated flyer showing that the Turning Point USA event was still on, having been moved to the nearby Birchman Baptist Church, which is also located in Fort Worth, Texas. When people asked Chloe what had happened, she explained that the TCU chapter of Turning Point USA had found a room on campus to hold the event in, and despite them determining that that room was available for the requested time, this supposedly Christian college denied them access to it. Chloe said, quote, "They denied the local Turning Point USA chapter's request to have me on campus on the 7th, even though the room was free. They didn't give a real reason why." Carlos Turrios, a reporter for the Dallas Express, also noted that the event had been canceled, and his post caught Attorney General Paxton's attention. It read, "This doesn't look like free speech to me. I'm going to look into this," a sentiment that the Attorney General seemed to share. My question is, whatever happened to the brand of Christians that were willing to be eaten alive by lions in the Colosseum, or burned to death as human torches on the streets of Rome, rather than to renounce the sacred ideals that they believed in? If you require trigger warnings, consider this your ripcord. In America, Christianity has become the pseudo-religion of equivocating, caveating cowards. And there is nothing virtuous or Christ-like about that. So if that is your cultural brand of so-called Christianity, then at the very least, do not make the mistake of thinking that I am your ally, because I am not. You and your cowardice are everything that I am fighting against, and the main reason that we got here in the first place. You are called to be in the world, but not of the world, to boldly proclaim the truth and to be salt and light, both of which are kind of irritating, but also vitally necessary. So either do what you claim that you've been called to do, or join a political club and quit wearing around the face of my Savior like Hannibal Lecter. And speaking of unmasking lifeless hollow shells, when the Senate failed to pass a temporary budget extension on Tuesday night, the Trump administration instructed government agencies to proceed with an orderly shutdown. The director of the Office of Management and Budget, Ross Voigt, sent a memo to the heads of all of the executive departments and agencies telling them to implement shutdown plans and rightly blaming the shutdown on the Senate Democrats. Because of their need to put on a meaningless show of, quote, resisting, the Senate fell 5 votes short of passing a Republican-backed bill that would have maintained all government spending as is for the next 7 weeks. Director Vaught wrote, "Unfortunately, Democrat senators are blocking passage of the funding bill in the Senate due to Democrats' insane policy demands, which include $1 trillion in new spending." President Trump supports passage of H.R. 5371, but it is now clear that Democrats will prevent passage of this clean, continuing resolution prior to 11:59 p.m. tonight and force a government shutdown. As such, affected agencies should now execute their plans for an orderly shutdown. It is unclear how long Democrats will maintain their untenable posture. making the duration of the shutdown difficult to predict. Regardless, employees should report to work for their next regularly scheduled tour of duty to undertake orderly shutdown activities. We will issue another memorandum indicating that government functions should resume once the President has signed a bill providing for appropriations. Ahead of the shutdown, Director Voigt issued a memo instructing agencies and departments to prepare for significant reductions in their workforce if a shutdown were to occur. The memo also stated that once funding is secured for the next fiscal year, agencies should retain the minimal number of employees necessary to carry out statutory functions. On Wednesday, Russ Voigt also announced that the Trump administration had frozen around $18 billion in infrastructure projects for New York City that had been earmarked for the Hudson Tunnel and the 2nd Avenue subway, citing those projects' unconstitutional DEI principles as the reason for this move. CBS News reported that the Hudson Tunnel project is to build a new train tunnel under the Hudson River and fix the existing North River tunnels for Amtrak and New Jersey Transit traffic. The 2nd Avenue subway project aims to extend the Q line into Harlem and add new stations. Director Voigt wrote this on X. Roughly $18 billion in New York City infrastructure projects have been put on hold to ensure funding is not flowing based on unconstitutional DEI principles. More info to come soon. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York has made the Hudson Tunnel project a top priority in recent years, securing billions of dollars in federal funding for what he called the nation's largest public works project. Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who represents parts of Brooklyn, have spearheaded Democrat resistance to Trump's government funding proposal. Jeffries told Director Voigt to get lost, saying, "Again with this guy and his baseless threats. Russ, you are the poster child for privilege and mediocrity. Get lost." The irony. Pot meet kettle. It is just a fact that gets proven every time you turn around. You always are exactly what you accuse others of being. If you are perpetually accusing others of being an abusive tyrant, it's because you are a tyrant who abuses the power that you have. If you constantly accuse others of cheating, it's because you cheat. If every other word out of your mouth is about the bigotries of others, it's because you're a bigot. If you accuse other people of being dishonest, it's because you are a manipulative liar. It never fails. The Trump administration's decision to hold back funding also came shortly after the president threatened to withhold federal funding from New York City if their socialist candidate, Zoran Mandani, wins the mayoral election in November. Mandani is currently leading by a significant margin in the polls, but I am, perhaps naively, calm enough to believe that not even New Yorkers are that suicidal. We'll find out if I'm right about that. Trump disagrees. On Monday he posted, "He is going to have problems with Washington like no mayor in the history of our once great city. Remember, he needs the money from me as president in order to fulfill all of his fake communist promises. He won't be getting any of it. So what's the point of voting for him? This ideology has failed always for thousands of years. It will fail again, and that's guaranteed." The administration's current freeze, however, does not appear to be tied to the mayor's race in any way, and it remains unclear exactly which DEI principles the White House is concerned about. But there were a variety of issues that the administration had with New York this week. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, blasted New York's Democrat Governor, Kathy Hochul. on Tuesday over allegations that the state is handing out commercial driver's licenses to illegal immigrants with no name given on the commercial driver's license. Duffy posted on X, Kathy Hochul continues her campaign to make New York one of the most lawless states in the country. All illegally issued commercial driver's licenses endanger American families on the road. My recent emergency action to restrict commercial driver's licenses will work to counteract these disastrous America Last policies. Now that I do support. On Wednesday, it was announced that the renowned conservationist Jane Goodall had died at the age of 91. The British primatologist and anthropologist was best known for her work with chimpanzees, which began in the 1960s. Goodall remained active in the scientific community until the day she died, and she was on a speaking tour in California at the time of her passing. In July of 1960, at the age of 26, Goodall established a field camp at Gombai Stream National Park, where she pioneered immersive observation and discovered that chimpanzees possess the ability to use tools, hunt, and to form social bonds. Over the decades, Goodall became a fervent conservationist, founding the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977 and launching Roots and Shoots, a youth-oriented environmental movement as well. She was named a UN Messenger of Peace in 2002 and has received multiple awards, including the Templeton Prize and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which was presented by Joe Biden in January of this year. Goodall wrote in Reasons for Hope, I realized that my experience in the forest, my understanding of the chimpanzees, has given me a new perspective. I was utterly convinced there was a great spiritual power that we call God, Allah, or Brahma, although I knew equally certainly that my infinite mind could never comprehend its form or nature. Elsewhere in the country, Homeland Security agents arrested more than 1,000 illegal immigrants as part of Operation Midway Blitz, and these massive raids will continue despite the government shutdown. According to the Department of Homeland Security, among those arrested were rapists, individuals with DUI convictions, and previously deported illegal immigrants who had returned. In one part of the operation, roughly 300 federal agents descended on an apartment complex that was teeming with suspected Tren de Aragua gang members. The Trump administration immigration raids in Chicago and the nearby suburbs started in September with the deployment of additional ICE and Border Patrol agents to the Windy City. In response, protesters have taken to the streets in an attempt to block the agents from arresting illegal immigrants. Rioters have also targeted an ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois, violently assaulting agents, hurling tear gas at them, and slashing the tires of their cars. While federal agents work to clean up the streets of Chicago, Illinois' Democrat Governor J.B. Pritzker expressed his elitist disapproval of those efforts. Feigning ignorance, he posted this on Saturday. The Trump administration's DHS officers appear to be carrying large weapons around downtown Chicago in camouflage and masks. This is not making anybody safer. It's a show of intimidation, instilling fear in our communities and hurting our businesses. No, it's protecting yourself after you've been violently attacked. DHS remains undeterred by all of the gaslighting as well, according to Assistant Secretary McLaughlin, who said, "We will not allow sanctuary politicians or violent rioters to stop us from enforcing the law and arresting pedophiles, murderers, gang members, rapists, and domestic abusers from American communities." And that wasn't the only good news. Walmart made a dramatic shift this week in order to align with the increasingly popular MAHA movement, by announcing that they will remove synthetic dyes and more than 30 other additives, including artificial sweeteners and preservatives, from all of Walmart's store brands, including Great Value, Market Side, Freshness Guaranteed, and Better Goods. According to the retailer, they are all going to be getting the full Maha makeover. The changes will affect more than 1,000 products, including salty snacks, sweet treats, salad dressings, and power drinks. The reformulated products are expected to hit the shelves within a matter of months, and all of the changes are set to be fully implemented by January of 2027. Walmart's United States CEO, John Furner, said, "Our customers have told us that they want products made with simpler, more familiar ingredients, and we've listened. By eliminating synthetic dyes and other ingredients, we're reinforcing our promise to deliver affordable food that families can feel good about." You've got to love the power of free markets to produce the changes that the public wants. Changes from this retailer will have a significant impact in America, as Walmart plays a massive role in this nation's grocery consumption. Just last year, Walmart netted $276 billion in grocery sales alone. Thanks to Secretary Kennedy, who is viewed as the figurehead of the Maha movement, major food companies like PepsiCo, Tyson Food, and Sam's Club, among others, have also signed on to end the use of synthetic food dyes and other controversial additives. In addition to working with major food brands, HHS has teamed up with the Department of Agriculture to limit food stamp purchases to nutritional items, given that it is the Supplemental Nutritional Program. Under this push, several states have cut sugary drinks and candy from the list of items that will be covered by tax dollars. So far, at least a dozen states have adopted waivers that were authorized by Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, to make these changes to their Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, aka SNAP, or food stamps. Back in August, Kennedy reaffirmed his message that taxpayers should not be forced under the guise of a nutrition program to pay for unhealthy foods for their fellow citizens, like soda and candy, which he says are fueling the obesity epidemic in the United States and making Americans sick, which drives up the cost of health care that we also have to pay for. Bobby said, "We are spending $405 million a day on SNAP, and about 10%, $1 out of every 10, is going to sugary drinks. And if you add candy to that, it's about 13 to 17%, almost $1 out of every 5. We all believe in free choice. We live in a democracy. People can make their own choice about what they are going to buy and what they are not going to buy. If you want to buy a sugary soda, you should be able to do that. But the U.S. taxpayer should not pay for it. U.S. taxpayers should not be paying to feed the poorest kids in the country food that will give them diabetes. Correct. Just like cigarettes and alcohol, you have every right to buy those things. But you have to buy them yourself. Your neighbor does not have to buy them for you. You know, perspective can be a wonderful thing because it reminds you that there are people out there with real problems to face. In Manchester, England, a knife-wielding terrorist targeted a synagogue on Yom Kippur, the most holy day of the year for Jews, also known as the Day of Atonement. Authorities received the first emergency calls at around 9:30 in the morning. Those calls reported a man who had rammed his vehicle into the people who were standing outside of the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue, just as their Yom Kippur service began. This vehicular attack alone put several people in the hospital. The suspect, who has been identified as, I kid you not, you can't make this stuff up, Jihad al-Shami, a 35-year-old Syrian immigrant who is now a British citizen, and he rewarded the country that mistakenly took him in by murdering those same native people who have been there for generations. Jihad then got out of his vehicle and began stabbing the innocent people around him. Authorities have confirmed that 2 people were killed and 4 others were injured. The UK's counter-terrorism police have officially deemed the attack as a terrorist incident. The suspect was shot and killed by police about 7 to 8 minutes after authorities were first called, and good riddance to disgusting trash. When the terrorist exited his vehicle, he immediately encountered synagogue security and other members of the synagogue who stopped him. The terrorist was not able to enter the actual synagogue because the entrance was locked and barred. You see, unfortunately, this is the way that Jews have to live, thanks to the small-minded bigots who frequently target them with violence. Speaking of which, this Syrian terrorist who came to the UK as a teenager from a culture where a woman's right to refuse a man is not respected was completely unsurprisingly, if you've been following the news in Britain, awaiting trial for rape charges. And he was out on bail when he committed this attack. A police source told The Guardian he was on nobody's radar for terrorism, but he definitely had a criminal record, though nothing to suggest he was going to do anything like this. But that is not a very honest claim, because little Jihad had sent death threats to the Conservative Parliament member John Howell in 2012 after that MP defended Israel's right to self-defense, and Howell was forced to employ police protection. The Telegraph reported that one email from Jihad read, "It is people like you who deserve to die." And the New York Post reported that Jihad's father praised Hamas after the October 7th massacre of 1,200 Israelis. Then Jihad decided to kill some Jews of his own. About 30,000 Jews live outside of London and Manchester. It is home to the largest Jewish community in the entire country. Anti-Semitic incidents in the UK hit record levels after the October 7th attack by Hamas. In the first half of this year alone, there have been more than 1,500 reported incidents involving anti-Semitism. Anna Riley, reporting for GB News from the scene of this latest incident, confirmed that 2 other men, both in their 30s, and a woman in her 60s, had also been arrested on terrorism charges in connection with this vile attack of racial bigotry. Riley added that her interviews with the local witnesses had revealed that people have been killed here, Jewish people, just for being Jewish. That is correct. This attack on a local synagogue came only weeks after the UK's Labour government used deliberately inflammatory language to accuse Israel of committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip, a false claim that many at the time argued would potentially fuel further hatred toward Jews. The leader of the UK Reform Party, Nigel Farage, echoed that sentiment, condemning both the street celebrations of this attack and the Starmer government's weak response to them, posting this on X. "The whole Jewish community in Britain is now deeply fearful. Within just a few hours of this horrific incident, we saw pro-Palestinian flags on the street, people out previously unplanned demonstrating." But here's the truth of it. They weren't demonstrating. They were actually celebrating. I can't even imagine we've ever seen such vile scenes on our streets, certainly not in my lifetime. In response to this, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says she's disappointed Disappointed. That's the most the Home Secretary can say. Well, I hope all of you watching this video are outraged. Outraged and frankly frightened. This is broken Britain. This is evidence of societal breakdown. It is deeply worrying and very frightening. Farage also criticized Prime Minister Keir Starmer's recent recognition of a so-called Palestinian state and warned about more upcoming bigoted protests that are planned for Saturday in London, saying there is a big march planned in London this Saturday, and I think the only way we can describe it is a hate march. I must admit, saying this now to you today, I feel more worried about the state of broken Britain than I ever have before. Well, my advice is just to start with not admitting immigrants that are named Jihad into your country, and you can't really go wrong. And speaking of shameful people who mistakenly think that their complete moral depravity and or their affirming worship of moral depravity are somehow a virtue. The once great Harvard University is all set to welcome a drag performer who calls himself Lahore Vagistan as a professor at this Ivy League institution of higher learning. According to the New York Post, Kareem Kubcharidani will teach in Harvard's Studies of Gender and Sexuality program. According to Harvard's own pathetic announcement, the classes that he will be offering are queer ethnography in the fall and Rue Politics, Drag, Race, and Desire in the spring. What an unfunny joke you have allowed yourself to become. Mr. Kubchandidis came to the attention of the academic elites when he did an interview with his own drag persona for Johns Hopkins University Press in 2015. He interviewed his own alter ego for Johns Hopkins. You wonder why there's no faith left in the institutions. During which he mainly discussed his stage name, saying, "My name is Lahore Vagistan. My preferred pronouns are she or auntie. I choose Lahore because my family traces its origins to Pakistan. Lahore is an important city in Pakistan, and well, I'm a bit of a whore. And Vagistan because I see the subcontinent as one big beautiful Vag-istan." So, if you are trying to win the title of the biggest sucker on the planet, then you should go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt to be tutored in the frivolous, completely useless nonsense that is being offered in the Ivy League by a pervert who reduces the women on this planet to their genitalia. We used to call that being a pig, but now it's brave and beautiful and to be affirmed. And Harvard isn't the only place that Mr. Lahore has worked as a professor. He is listed as an associate professor for theater, dance, and performance studies and an associate professor in race, colonialism, and dysphoria at Tufts University. And his work in all the air quotes in the world has been published in several academic journals. Mr. Kubchandani is also the author of Ishstyle, Accenting Gay Indian Nightlife. And apparently all of that qualifies you to teach rigorous studies at what only a few years ago was one of America's most prestigious colleges, until it was overrun with anti-Semitism, which caused the rest of its plummeting standards and its unwanted products to come to life. You know what? You can have it. You can have Harvard. You can keep the Ivy Leagues. I will sit back and watch them crumble into the dust and salt the ground when there's nothing left. But as some institutions commit a very ugly public suicide, others are sensing the change in the cultural air, and they are pivoting. Apple has now pulled any apps that are used to expose the whereabouts of ICE agents across the country. These apps are used to help illegal immigrants avoid arrest and to help attackers target law enforcement agents. You probably recall that 2 ICE detainees were mistakenly killed and a third was injured as a result of a recent shooting in Dallas. After it was revealed that the anti-ICE shooter used the app before he opened fire on the facility, Apple actually made the responsible move by choosing to end the use of these violence facilitators on their platform. Good for you. In the wake of this rising radical violence, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, told Fox News Digital, "We reached out to Apple today demanding they remove the ICE Block app from their App Store, and Apple did so. ICE Block is designed to put ICE agents at risk just for doing their jobs, and violence against law enforcement is an intolerable red line that cannot be crossed. This Department of Justice will continue making every effort to protect our brave federal law enforcement officers who risk their lives every day to keep Americans safe." Following the recent attack in Dallas, Marcos Charles of ICE leadership called out these anti-ICE apps during a press conference for serving as a casting call to invite bad actors to attack law enforcement officers. It's no different than giving the hitman the location of their intended target. And this is exactly what we saw happen in Dallas yesterday. Some mainstream media outlets like CNN have chosen to deliberately amplify the use of these apps despite receiving repeated warnings that doing so would only lead to more attacks on law enforcement. "We truly wish we didn't have to say we told you so, but here we are," the acting director for ICE, Todd Lyons, said at the time. CNN's promotion of an ICE spotting app is reckless and irresponsible. Advertising an app that basically paints a target on federal law enforcement officers' backs is sickening. CNN is willfully endangering the lives of officers who put their lives on the line every day and enabling dangerous criminal aliens to evade U.S. law. The border czar, Tom Homan, said at the time, "It's only a matter of time before ICE officers are going to be ambushed by some nut, like what happened in L.A., throwing a Molotov cocktail, throwing bricks at these officers. This is just disgusting at every level. So I hope the DOJ dives in this deeply, because ICE is concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats." In a statement to Fox News Digital, Apple confirmed that it had taken ICE Block and similar apps down from its App Store, saying, "We created the App Store to be a safe and trusted place to discover apps. Based on information we received from law enforcement about the safety risks associated with ICE Block, we have removed it and similar apps from the App Store." ICE Block's creator, Joshua Aaron, said that he was incredibly disappointed by Apple's actions today. Who the hell cares? He added, "Capitulating to an authoritarian regime is never the right move." All I hear is wah, 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 wah. But Aaron went on to say, Apple has claimed they received information from law enforcement that ICE Block served to harm law enforcement officers. This is patently false. how do you know what they received? Because based on the information, that stuff that adults use to shape their opinions, based on the information that we all have, like that shooting in Dallas, all of us out here know, whether you want us to or not, that the only person in this scenario who is spewing false claims is you. So go preach to the choir, because that's the only people willing to listen to you at this point. And speaking of people who still think that they are in a position to control what everyone else is forced to hear, Netflix stock went down 2.5% after Elon Musk publicly pointed out on Tuesday that they were pushing the social contagion of trans ideology onto trusting and vulnerable young children, which was why he was canceling his subscription to their services. The billionaire SpaceX CEO made this announcement on X after clips of multiple Netflix children's shows started going viral, exposing everything that has been going on that platform. These animated shows, which target kids 7 and up, centered on explicitly LGBT storylines. And one of the most egregious examples, Dead End Paranormal Park, included a cartoon character who identified as transgender. Unfortunately, that offending television show wasn't just one isolated incident. Clips have been circulating all over X, highlighting LGBT themes across Netflix content that is aimed at young children. Another clip that is going viral is part of the animated show Ridley Jones, which includes Fred, the non-binary cow who is fretting over his decision to use a different name and pronouns for the first time since last seeing his grandmother. In the animated show Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, 2 women share a passionate kiss. Cocomelon Lane is also listed as one of the shows that has inspired the boycott, as it features a little boy wearing a princess dress for his 2 gay dads. The animated show Strawberry Shortcake, Berry in the Big City, goes out of its way to promote transgender drag queens to kids. Chaya Raichik, who runs the popular social media account Libs of TikTok, has been leading the charge to expose the actual content in these supposed children's shows, and she has also been reposting proof screenshots of users who have canceled their Netflix subscriptions. She also noted that Hamish Steele, the trans-identifying creator of the children's show Dead End Paranormal Park, made vulgar comments on Blue Sky following the assassination of Charlie Kirk last month. Following the clips of these supposed children's shows going viral, many X-users flooded the platform with screenshots of proof that they had canceled their subscriptions, and Netflix stock dropped. It was down 2.4% as of Friday, according to Forbes. They also noted that after 5 days of trading, Netflix shares were down 4.4%, and that is despite the fact that shares for the streaming platform have recently been on an upward trajectory, rising 30% since the beginning of last year. But Musk's calls for a boycott seem to make an impact, and social media users who are tired of having other people's beliefs shoved down their throats celebrated the impact of their pocketbooks by enabling them to send a message. And speaking of finally putting our foot down that boundaries are going to start being respected, and we are not going to allow our live and let live natures to be grossly taken advantage of anymore. The Department of Health and Human Services is now taking steps to ensure that federal AIDS funding cannot be diverted to be used for so-called gender-affirming care instead, which the Daily Wire's Mary Margaret Olohan learned was what was happening under President Joe Biden's administration. Okay, I'm going to be very clear in my objection, and I'll speak slowly. When we consent to giving you our hard-earned money for treatment for AIDS, a deadly disease, and you go behind our backs and use it for elective cosmetic procedures instead, you can expect that there will be hell to pay from now on. You govern only by the consent of the governed, and we did not consent to that. When I give you money to pay the mortgage, and instead you spend it on a new home theater system, that is stealing. And I have news for you. The United States ain't the United Kingdom. We aren't just going to lie down and take it until the damage is irrevocable. So you better figure out which side your bread is buttered on real fast. Under the Biden administration, states were using federal tax dollars that were approved for HIV and AIDS treatment to cover transgender surgeries, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers. For example, the Biden administration allowed the Ryan White HIV/AIDS drug assistance program to provide access to gender-affirming hormone therapy. The Department of Health's AIDS drug assistance program in D.C. openly covered transgender hormone treatments and used the federal 340B program to subsidize those hormones. In New Jersey, the Department of Medicine at Rutgers University states that it offers gender-affirming hormone therapy for transgender persons, in line with the completely discredited World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH, describing the transgender procedures that they provide as an important part of a holistic approach to wellness and preventative medicine. In April, the Department of Health and Human Services went public with its intent to block our funds from being misused further. Now it is taking additional steps to make sure that the recipients of these funds are aware that they are given to them for designated things, not for whatever you happen to want to spend them on. On Friday, HRSA's administrator, Tom Ingalls, explained to the Daily Wire that the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program is a lifeline for thousands of Americans living with HIV, and HRSA will not allow funds to be diverted from their true purpose. Every dollar of the AIDS drug assistance program must support HIV/AIDS-related treatment, not sex trait modification medications unrelated to HIV care. On Friday, HHS posted a notice of funding opportunity clarifying that the AIDS drug assistance program emergency relief funds are strictly limited to HIV/AIDS treatments. That notice says that if medications, such as hormones, are medically necessary for HIV/AIDS care, they will be covered, but not if they are for sex trait modification purposes, and any funds that are received through drug rebates will have to remain within the HIV/AIDS program. They can't be redirected willy-nilly to other unrelated medical procedures. Mr. Ingalls added, this notice of funding opportunity makes clear that USA is safeguarding program integrity and cracking down to ensure that people living with HIV get the care they need. And speaking of people getting what they deserve, on Friday morning, another cartel boat carrying drug runners and their deadly cargo was blown to smithereens on the orders of President Trump. Are these people stupid? Because we can do this all day. Find a new market, because the United States is closed to your poison, and so are our children's veins. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, posted a video of the strike against the latest narco-terrorists that were sent to meet their maker. This marks the fourth strike that has been ordered by the president against drug traffickers in the Caribbean Sea. U.S. forces have now killed 21 drug runners in those 4 narco-terrorist strikes. The War Secretary confirmed 4 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel were killed in the strike, and no U.S. forces were harmed in the operation. The strike was conducted in international waters, just off the coast of Venezuela, while the vessel was transporting substantial amounts of narcotics, headed to America to poison our people. Our intelligence, without a doubt, confirmed that this vessel was trafficking narcotics, the people aboard were narco-terrorists, and they were operating on a known narco-trafficking transit route. These strikes will continue until the attacks on the American people are over. The Trump administration told Congress earlier this week that the president considers the United States to be in an armed conflict with the South American drug cartels, and that his actions are an act of national self-defense. A White House spokeswoman told the New York Times that the president acted in line with the law of armed conflict to protect our country from those trying to bring deadly poison to our shores, and he is delivering on his promise to take on the cartels and eliminate these national security threats from murdering more Americans. Democrats, of course, are condemning the strikes. What else is new? It doesn't have to make any sense. Just object to everything. That's how you prove that you're serious, at least to the other performative theater kids. But there are opinions that I actually do care less about. Venezuela's drug lord dictator, Nicolas Maduro, has likewise condemned our action off his country's coast, calling the strikes a military attack on civilians who were not at war and were not militarily threatening any country. No, dude, that was a casual strike. When we make a full-scale military attack, there won't be any doubt as to what it is. The outraged parasitic drug dealer also accused the Trump administration of seeking a regime change in Venezuela, to which I can only say that Maduro still has a $50 million bounty on his head, which will be paid out by the United States government. Just thought I'd throw that out there, to any competing cartels. And speaking of the reckoning that is coming for the world's low-life thugs and the people who appease them instead of resolutely opposing them, Friday evening, Munich Airport had to close down both of its runways for the second time in less than 24 hours due to a drone sighting causing delays to pile up. Munich Airport was also closed down for several hours late on Thursday and into the night after unconfirmed drone sightings disrupted dozens of flights. The result of this second incident, according to Munich Airport, was that 23 flights were diverted, 12 flights into Munich and 48 departures out of Munich were canceled or postponed, which stranded some 6,500 passengers. They added, as on the previous night, the airport and airlines took care of the passengers. Camp beds, blankets, drinks, and snacks were handed out. On Saturday morning, as they prepared to resume business, the airport advised travelers to check in with their airlines for the updated travel schedules. Aviation all across Europe has been subjected to chaos in recent weeks by similar drone sightings that many are blaming on Russia. The Kremlin has officially denied any involvement, for whatever that is worth, and authorities have yet to officially attribute Thursday's or Friday's drone sightings to a specific party. However, Germany's Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt responded to this growing problem earlier on Friday by promising to bring forward legislation that would make it easier for the police to have the military shoot down any drones going forward. And speaking of taking action to clean up the world that we all have to live in, it has now come to light that the Democrat candidate for Virginia's Attorney General, Jay Jones, openly fantasized about murdering a conservative state leader via 2 bullets to the head and pissing on the graves of other Republicans in his now public text messages. In the wake of this scandal, during a time of increased political violence from the left, making it a non-negotiable prerequisite for any leader to set the appropriate example for the society that we all actually want to live in, Jones has sought to blame Republicans and President Trump for his shameful conduct instead of taking responsibility for himself, like a real man and a real leader. So, given that choice, it's time for a little public shaming, because that is actually a useful tactic to use when it comes to our leaders. In text messages that were first obtained by National Review, Jones told another lawmaker that he would use 2 bullets to murder then GOP House Speaker Todd Gilbert. To be more specific, Jones texted Delegate Kerry Coyner on August 8, 2022, 3 people, 2 bullets. Gilbert, Hitler, and Pol Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Spoiler, put Gilbert in the crew with the 2 worst people you know, and he receives both bullets every time. Earlier in the text messages, Jones also said that he would attend the funerals of Republican lawmakers in Virginia only so that he could piss on their graves and send them out awash in something. And you should know that what prompted this unhinged, vile tirade was simply the fact that Republicans were saying kind things about the Democrat delegate, Joe Johnson, who had just passed away at the age of 90. Yes, this rotten soul desires war so much that when his supposed enemies say nice things about his dead colleague, he thinks that they should be shot in the head for it. And he believes in that default to violence so much that he even shared those embarrassing, deranged thoughts with other people and immortalized them in writing. That's how foundational they are to him. That is how much a part of him the unhinged violence is. It doesn't even occur to him anymore that this is a very ugly part of himself that he should be horrifically ashamed of and suppress at all costs so that no one ever knows it's there. No, he proudly displays that appalling part of himself to other people. So, given that, if you vote for this guy, you get exactly what you deserve to get. Democracy is, after all, the theory that the people know what they want, and they deserve to get it good and hard. Now, if on the other hand, you want all of us to live in a better world than we do right now, then you are obligated to refuse to vote for any leaders who are not better than this. The world becomes less extreme, less violent, and less heated when the extreme, violent, and heated people are thoroughly rejected and pushed to the outer fringes. The world gets more extreme, violent, and heated when the extreme, violent, and heated people are placed in central positions. It's really quite simple. And yes, I would be saying the exact same thing if it was a conservative who had made these kinds of vile remarks. In fact, I have repeatedly called out Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, devoted entire episodes to doing that. So I have more than just words. I have proof to back up that claim. So choose the world that you want to live in, and then live with the outcomes of your own choice. A follow-up message from Jones read, I've told you this before, only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy. So to be crystal clear, he is advocating for murder and violence to be used to subvert the democratic will of the people in order to force the unpopular policies of the fringe onto everyone in society through fear and intimidation. So what happens when that means you? Because he disagrees with you on one of your policy issues. The Democrat candidate also asked if Gilbert and his wife were breeding little fascists. And that is a quote. A dehumanizing quote, but a quote nonetheless. And to be very clear, these published texts aren't just hyperbolic claims. No one is denying any of this. The recipient, Coiner's campaign, confirmed that the texts were real and called them disturbing and disqualifying for anyone who wants to seek public office, obviously. A spokesperson added, J. Jones wishing violence on the children of a colleague and joked about shooting Todd Gilbert. It's disgusting and unbecoming of any public official. Yeah, that didn't sound like a joke to me. Did it sound like a joke to any of you out there? I didn't think so. Jones has also not denied that the texts are real. His only response was to blame Republicans, specifically his GOP opponent, Jason Myers, and the so-called Trump-controlled media for telling the people the uncomfortable truth about him that they have a right to know. Jones told Fox, like all people, I sent text messages that I regret, and I believe that violent rhetoric has no place in our politics. Agreed. You now have no place in our politics. He added, let's be clear about what is happening in the Attorney General's race right now. Jason Myers is dropping smears through Trump-controlled media organizations to assault my character and rescue his desperate campaign. No, you have no character, and that is on you, not on the people who expose that ugly fact to the disinfecting light of day. The once popular claims of victimhood continued, and Jones also told NBC News that I want to issue my deepest apology to Speaker Gilbert and his family. Reading back, those words made me sick to my stomach. I am embarrassed, ashamed, and sorry. I have reached out to Speaker Gilbert to apologize directly to him, his wife Jennifer, and their children. I cannot take back what I said. I can only take full accountability and offer my sincere apology. Good. You should. But that does not make you fit to be in a leadership position at this point. Maybe down the road, after a long term of unwavering commitment that serves as a record of proof that there has been real change. But that day is not right now. Now is the time for accountability, which always has to precede forgiveness, and for us to steer this country away from violence to a better place. And until you can do that for your own self, you are not qualified to be trusted to try to do it for us. The Republican gubernatorial candidate, Winsome Earl Sears, agreed that the texts from Jones are wholly disqualifying, posting on X, "This is horrible to read and should be wholly disqualifying of someone running for an office that protects the people of Virginia. J. Jones's horrific comments are a symptom of the entire Democratic Party, and his running mate, Abigail Spanberger, needs to call on him to drop out." Yes, she does. Because all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And we have all been guilty of doing that for far too long, but no more. Over the last decade, Democrats have ramped up their language, demonizing and dehumanizing their political opponents and law enforcement, often comparing them to Nazis, the Gestapo, Adolf Hitler, and fascists, instead of just sticking to the far less exciting, far less dramatic truth, which is that you simply disagree with each other's perspectives, like political parties have always done. As a result of their need to dramatize that to the max, with inflammatory rhetoric, last month Charlie Kirk, a champion for free speech, was assassinated while setting a far better example than our leaders and media by speaking to college students who held differing views from his own. The shooter mirrored the extreme language that had relentlessly been modeled for him by carving, "Hey, fascist, catch," onto his bullets. Weeks later, there was a targeted shooting at an ICE facility in Dallas, Texas, by a man who scrawled anti-ICE onto his rifle cartridges. Moreover, over the summer, Democrats' Minnesota lawmaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated in an act that was labeled targeted political violence by a man with anti-Trump No Kings posters in his vehicles who worked for Tim Walz. There have also been numerous assassination attempts on the life of President Trump. So I am going to keep saying it for as long as it needs to be said, until the political violence stops. To all of the violence-loving people in our society who are determined to lash out at the innocent people around them, I will acknowledge that we can't stop you from continuing to travel down the dark road of hate that so many of you are lost on right now. We can't stop you from ending more lives, but there are not enough of you to kill all of us. Those are just the facts. So it would be better to just argue this out with us, like rational adults, and may the best man win, rather than to fight it out with us. But even if you choose that path for us all, even if this has to end with graves for some of us and prisons for all of you, even if you choose that path of violence, you will not win. Because we will not stop, we will not be silenced, we will not surrender, not ever. We will not kneel and submit to you. That day will never come, no matter what you do. And the more you try to bring that day about through violence, the more firmly we all reject you. We believe in the rightness of our cause every bit as much as you believe in yours. And we are just as committed to it as you are. In fact, we are objectively more committed to our cause than you are to yours, because you may be willing to kill for what you believe in, or fantasize about killing for what you believe in, but we are willing to die for what we believe in. So we are going to keep fighting no matter what you do to us. And you are never going to stop us. Trying simply will not work, because now we are all Charlie Kirk. That is it for me. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would ask that you would please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow buttons, because that is what does the trick in making these things successful. And I hope you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.